The antique brass knocker felt cold under my fingers as I rapped it against the heavy oak door of Briarcliff Hall. The sound echoed through the misty evening air, seemingly absorbed by the dense fog that had settled around the grand estate. I waited, clutching my leather satchel, wondering if coming here had been a mistake after all. My name is Dr. Eris Thorne, and as a historian specializing in architectural anomalies, I'd been drawn to Briarcliff Hall like a moth to flame. The estate had been closed to the public for decades, but when its reclusive owner, Elias Vance, had reached out requesting my expertise, how could I refuse? His letter had been cryptic, mentioning architectural inconsistencies that defied explanation and rooms that seemed to shift when no one was looking. The door creaked open, revealing a tall, gaunt man with silver hair and piercing gray eyes that seemed to look through me rather than at me. Dr. Thorne, I presume. His voice was surprisingly warm, contrasting with his austere appearance. I am Elias Vance. Please come in. I stepped across the threshold, immediately struck by the peculiar sensation that the house was somehow aware of my presence. The grand foyer was illuminated by a crystal chandelier that cast dancing shadows across marble floors and wood-paneled walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced Vances from centuries past. Thank you for coming on such short notice, Elias said, taking my coat. Few academics take my concerns seriously these days. Your letter was intriguing, Mr. Vance. Architectural anomalies are precisely my area of study. He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Then you are precisely who I need. Let me show you to your room, and then perhaps you'd like to see the ballroom. It's where most of our guests begin to notice things. As we ascended the grand staircase, I couldn't shake the feeling that the portraits were following our progress, their painted eyes shifting incrementally as we passed. Elias led me down a corridor to a beautifully appointed guest room on the second floor. I've arranged for dinner at 7 in the small dining room, he said. Afterward, I thought we might discuss the peculiarities of Briarcliff Hall. After freshening up, I took the opportunity to explore the second floor. The manor was even larger than it appeared from outside, with corridors that seemed to extend impossibly far. I found myself drawn toward the sound of soft music, a melancholy cello piece I couldn't quite identify. Following the melody led me to a set of double doors intricately carved with scenes of dancers frozen in mid-waltz. I pushed them open and gasped. Before me lay the most magnificent ballroom I had ever seen. Bathed in the golden light of a dozen chandeliers, the ballroom was a vision from another era. The ceiling soared at least 30 feet high, painted with a fresco of the night sky, complete with twinkling stars that seemed almost to move. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined one wall, though they showed only darkness outside despite the early evening hour. The parquet floor gleamed, its intricate pattern creating an optical illusion of depth. Remarkable, isn't it? Elias's voice startled me. I hadn't heard him approach. It's extraordinary, I admitted. The proportions shouldn't be possible, given the exterior dimensions of the house. Yes, he said softly. The first of many impossibilities you'll encounter here. This ballroom has witnessed countless celebrations over the centuries. Every guest who has ever stayed at Briarcliff Hall has seen this room. His voice dropped to a near whisper. But no one who has ventured to the third floor has ever returned to tell what they found there. A chill ran down my spine. The third floor? We should go to dinner, he said abruptly, offering his arm. My sister will be joining us. She rarely meets guests, but she was quite insistent on meeting you. Dinner was a strange affair. Elias's sister, Lyra Vance, was a small woman with the same piercing gray eyes as her brother, though hers had a milky quality, as though partially blinded. She asked pointed questions about my research, my interest in architectural anomalies, and whether I believed in what she called the thinness of reality. The manor was built in 1792, Elias explained, as we dined on roast pheasant. Our ancestor, Silas Vance, was an architect with unconventional ideas about space and dimension. He collaborated with a mathematician, Lyra added, watching me intently. A man who was eventually committed to an asylum for his radical theories about folded space. Folded space? I asked. My academic curiosity piqued. The notion that physical space can be manipulated like paper, creating pockets where the rules of geometry no longer apply, Elias said. Silas believed he could build these principles into the very structure of the house. That's fascinating, but surely impossible, I replied. Lyra's thin lips curved into a smile. And yet, the ballroom exists with dimensions that cannot be reconciled with the exterior of the house. How do you explain that, Dr. Thorne? After dinner, Elias invited me to his study, a cozy room lined with books and dominated by a large desk covered in architectural drawings. These are the original plans for Briarcliff Hall, he said, unrolling a yellowed parchment, drawn by Silas himself. I leaned over the plans, immediately spotting inconsistencies. Corridors that should lead to dead ends instead looped back on themselves. Rooms that overlapped in impossible ways. And the third floor? I frowned, tracing this strange geometry with my finger. The third floor doesn't make sense, I murmured. These rooms couldn't possibly connect this way. No, they couldn't, Elias agreed. Not if one adheres to conventional geometry. But Silas wasn't conventional. What exactly is happening on the third floor, Mr. Vance? He sighed heavily. People disappear, Dr. Thorne. 17 guests over the past century. They venture upstairs, curious about rumors they've heard, and they simply never come down again. That's a matter for the police, not a historian, I said carefully, wondering if I'd walked into some elaborate trap. The police have investigated multiple times. They find nothing. No evidence of foul play, no hidden passages, no bodies. He rubbed his temples. The last detective who came searched the entire third floor and declared it empty. He left, wrote his report, and then shot himself 3 days later. The note he left simply said, "The rooms keep changing." That night, sleep eluded me. My room, though comfortable, felt strangely fluid, as though the walls breathed subtly in and out. The house creaked and settled, sounds magnified in the quiet darkness. Around 3 in the morning, I heard what sounded like distant dancing music and the soft murmur of voices from somewhere above, the third floor. I told myself I was imagining things, but the historian in me couldn't resist the mystery. I slipped on my robe and took my flashlight, stepping quietly into the corridor. The music grew slightly louder as I found the staircase leading upward. A velvet rope blocked the way with a small sign, reading, "No admittance." I hesitated only briefly before stepping over it. The stairs seemed to go on longer than they should, twisting in a way that left me disoriented. When I finally reached the third floor landing, the music had stopped, leaving only an oppressive silence. I switched on my flashlight, revealing a corridor that stretched in both directions, lined with doors. I tried the nearest door, locked. As were the next 3 I tried. The fourth door, however, swung open at my touch, revealing what appeared to be a child's nursery, though thick dust covered everything, suggesting it hadn't been used in decades. A rocking chair by the window moved slightly, as though someone had just vacated it. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding flat and muffled, as if the air itself was absorbing the sound. I backed out of the room, unsettled, and continued down the hall. The next open door led to a laboratory of sorts, with ancient equipment and jars of unidentifiable specimens. Notebooks filled with equations and diagrams covered a large desk. I picked one up, squinting at the faded handwriting. "The convergence of non-Euclidean geometry with physical space creates pockets of dimensional instability," I read aloud. "Within these pockets, perception and reality become malleable." A sound behind me, like a footstep, made me whirl around. The doorway through which I'd entered was gone, replaced by a solid wall. My heart pounding, I turned in a complete circle. The room now had a different door on the opposite wall. Had I become disoriented? I was certain the door had been behind me. I approached the new door cautiously and opened it. Instead of the hallway, I found myself looking into the ballroom I'd seen earlier, but changed. The chandeliers were lit with candles rather than electric lights, and dozens of people in 18th century attire waltzed across the floor, though no music played. None of them seemed to notice me watching from a doorway that shouldn't have existed on the ballroom's second-floor gallery. I blinked, and the scene changed. The dancers were gone. The ballroom empty and decayed, dust covers on the furniture, the windows boarded up. Another blink, and it transformed again. Now modern, mid-renovation, with scaffolding and construction materials. I stepped back, closing the door with trembling hands. When I turned around, the laboratory had changed too. Equipment had moved, notebooks were arranged differently, and a half-drunk cup of tea steamed on the desk where nothing had been before. "Spatial inconsistency is merely the first symptom," said a voice from the shadows. An elderly man in antiquated clothing emerged, his eyes the same piercing gray as Elias and Lyra's. "Temporal inconsistency follows." "Who are you?" I asked, though I suspected I knew. "Silas Vance, at your service." He gave a small bow. "And you've wandered into my greatest achievement and my most terrible mistake." "You can't be, Silas. He would be over 250 years old." He smiled sadly. "Time moves differently here, especially on the third floor." "What year do you believe it to be, madam?" I told him, and he looked shocked. "Then it has been even longer than I thought. I have been trapped here for what feels like decades, shifting between times and variations of my home." "This is impossible," I whispered. "No more impossible than a ballroom larger on the inside than the house that contains it," he countered. "I found a way to fold space, you see, to create rooms that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But I didn't account for the temporal implications. The more I manipulated space, the more time began to leak. The missing guests, not missing, just lost in time. Some went forward, some backward. Others, I fear, slipped sideways into versions of the manner that never quite existed in your reality." He gestured around us. "We are all here, trapped in the folds. Sometimes we glimpse each other passing like ships in the night across the decades or centuries." "How do I get back?" I asked, fighting rising panic. Silas approached a bookshelf and removed a leather-bound journal. "My calculations. I've been trying to reverse the effect for however long I've been here. If you can understand them, perhaps you can find your way back, and maybe help the rest of us." I took the journal with shaking hands. "Elias and Lyra. They know about this, don't they? They sent me up here deliberately." "My descendants have their own agenda," Silas said cryptically. "They believe there is power in the anomaly, power they can harness. They send people they believe are sensitive to the folds, hoping to learn more." Before I could question him further, the room darkened momentarily, as though a cloud had passed over an unseen sun. When the light stabilized, Silas was gone. I spent what felt like hours examining the journal, trying to decipher Silas's elaborate mathematical notations. The equations described space in ways I'd never considered, treating physical dimensions as variables that could be manipulated under certain conditions. The manor, it seemed, had been built on a focal point where such manipulation was naturally easier, what Silas called a thin place. As I studied, I became aware that the room around me was subtly changing. Books appeared and disappeared on shelves. The color of the curtains shifted from green to blue to faded red. Outside the windows, I glimpsed different seasons, different eras. Gaslit streets, horse-drawn carriages, then automobiles, then nothing but overgrown wilderness. I needed to find my way back, and soon. According to Silas's notes, the ballroom was the key, a deliberate anomaly designed as an anchor point, a stable reference in the shifting geometry of the house. If I could reach it, I might find my way back to my own time and space. I approached the door through which I'd previously seen the ballroom. Taking a deep breath, I opened it and found only a linen closet. I tried another door and another, increasingly desperate, as each revealed ordinary rooms, none leading where I needed to go. Then I heard it. Faint cello music. The same melancholy tune I'd followed earlier. I followed the sound down a corridor that seemed to lengthen with each step, the walls occasionally rippling like disturbed water. Finally, I reached a familiar set of double doors carved with dancing figures. The ballroom beyond was empty but intact, moonlight streaming through the windows. As I stepped inside, I felt a strange sensation, as though the air had become thicker, more resistant. The door swung shut behind me with a decisive click. "You've made it further than most." Lyra Vance stood in the center of the room, though I was certain it had been empty moments before. She looked different, younger, her eyes clear and sharp. "What is this place, really?" I demanded. "And what do you want from me?" "This house exists in multiple states simultaneously," she said, beginning to circle me slowly. "Past, present, future, and paths not taken, all overlapping. Most people can only perceive one state at a time. Some, like you, can sense the transitions. You feel them, don't you? The shifts?" I nodded reluctantly. "Silas said you and Elias believe there's power in the anomaly." She laughed, a brittle sound. "Silas, always so dramatic. There is power here, but not the kind my brother thinks. He believes we can control the shifts, use them to see the future, or change the past. He's wrong." She stopped directly in front of me. "The power is in surviving them, in learning to navigate between states of reality." "You've been to the third floor," I realized. "You've returned." "Many times. I've learned its patterns, its rhythms. The house speaks to me now." She reached out, taking my hand. Her touch was ice cold. "It could speak to you too, Aris. You have the sensitivity?" I pulled away. "I just want to go back to the second floor, finish my research, and leave." "You don't understand. No one truly leaves Briarcliff Hall. Even those who walk out the front door carry a piece of it with them, a fold in their perception that never quite smooths out." The cello music began again, though there was no cellist to be seen. "That's our cue," Lyra said, suddenly urgent. "The shift is coming. Choose now, Aris. Stay with me. Learn to navigate the folds, or try to run back to a world that will never again make sense to you." The air in the ballroom began to waver, like heat rising from summer pavement. The floor beneath my feet felt less solid, as though I might sink through it at any moment. Lyra extended her hand again, her expression almost pleading. In that moment of decision, the ballroom doors burst open. Elias stood there, looking wild-eyed and disheveled. "Aris, don't listen to her," he gasped. "Lyra isn't what she seems." Lyra's face contorted with anger. "You fool! You'll disrupt the pattern." The room began to shake, chandeliers swinging violently, the fresco ceiling rippling like disturbed water. "The house is collapsing," Elias shouted over the growing rumble. "Too many contradictions in one place. We need to get to stable ground." He grabbed my arm, pulling me towards the doors. Lyra lunged for us, her form seeming to elongate unnaturally, fingers stretching into claw-like appendages. "She's been trapped between states for years," Elias explained as we ran down the corridor. "Not fully in any one reality. It's driven her mad." We reached the staircase, the manor groaning around us like a ship in a storm. Paintings fell from walls, furniture slid across tilting floors, and behind us, a terrible ripping sound suggested the very fabric of the house was tearing. "Why did you bring me here?" I shouted as we descended. "To help me fix it," he called back. "The anomalies are getting worse. Silas's equations predicted this. Eventually, the folds would become unstable. I needed someone who could understand his work, help reverse it before the house tears itself apart and takes half the countryside with it." We reached the second floor, which seemed relatively stable compared to the chaos above. Elias pulled me into his study, slamming and locking the door behind us. He rushed to his desk, retrieving the original plans I'd examined earlier, along with a stack of modern equipment, laptops, measuring devices, and what appeared to be custom-built sensors. "I've been monitoring the anomalies for years," he explained, bringing up complex graphical displays on a laptop. "They're expanding beyond the house now. Last month, a farmer's field half a mile away suddenly aged 50 years overnight. Before that, a section of the nearby forest reverted to saplings." "You should have been honest with me from the start," I said, though I couldn't deny my fascination with what he was showing me. "Would you have believed me? Or would you have dismissed me as a madman, as every other expert has?" His eyes pleaded for understanding. "My family has been trying to contain this for generations. We're the only ones who can perceive the shifts naturally. Something in our bloodline connects us to what Silas did." A violent tremor shook the room, books tumbling from shelves. A crack raced across the wall of the study. "We're running out of time," Elias said grimly. "The third floor is becoming untethered. If it fully detaches from conventional space-time, what happens then?" "I don't know, but the mathematical models suggest a cascading effect. The instability would spread, growing exponentially." I thought of Silas's journal, still clutched in my hand. I may have something that can help. For the next few hours, as the house shuddered and groaned around us, we worked feverishly, combining Silas's theoretical approach with Elias's empirical data. The old architect had been brilliant, but had made a fundamental error in his calculations, one that had compounded over centuries. The house isn't just folded space, I realized, staring at the combined equations. It's a knot in reality. Silas created a self-reinforcing loop, with each anomaly strengthening the others. So how do we unravel it without causing everything to collapse? "We don't," I said, the solution becoming clear. "We can't undo what's been done without destroying the house entirely, but we can stabilize it, find the keystone of the structure, and reinforce it." "The ballroom," Elias whispered. "It's always been the center." Another violent tremor hit, and plaster rained down from the ceiling. "We need to get to the ballroom now," I said, gathering the essential papers, "before the connection to the third floor completely destabilizes." The journey back to the ballroom was harrowing. Corridors stretched and contracted as we moved through them. Doors led to unexpected places. A conservatory suddenly opened onto a cliff edge overlooking a stormy sea. A bathroom revealed a sunlit garden from a century ago. When we finally reached the carved double doors of the ballroom, they were warping in their frames, wood rippling like liquid. We forced them open together and stumbled into chaos. The ballroom was filled with fragments of different times. In one corner, an 18th century ball was in progress. In another, the room stood abandoned and decaying. The ceiling showed night and day simultaneously, and the floor rippled with temporal waves. And in the center stood Lyra, or something wearing Lyra's form. She seemed to flicker between different versions of herself, young, old, alive, dead, and something else entirely, a shape I couldn't quite comprehend. "You're too late," her voice echoed strangely, as though coming from multiple sources at once. "The unraveling has begun." "Lyra, please," Elias pleaded, "help us stabilize the house. You know what will happen if it collapses completely?" She laughed, the sound fracturing into multiple overlapping echoes. "Why would I want stability? In chaos, I am everywhere and everywhen. I have transcended the limitations of a single reality." I studied her carefully, noticing how the distortions in the room seemed to center on her position. "She's the keystone now," I murmured to Elias. "Somehow she's become the focal point of the anomaly." "How is that possible?" "Your sister has spent more time navigating the folds than anyone," I theorized. 80 decades of exposure must have fundamentally changed her, integrated her into the structure of the anomaly itself. The realization hit Elias like a physical blow. "So to stabilize the house, we need to stabilize Lyra," I confirmed, "or remove her influence entirely." Lyra's form rippled, growing larger, more distorted. "I can hear you, you know. I hear everything in every version of this house across all possible timelines." She gestured, and the floor beneath Elias liquefied. He sank to his knees, then his waist, being pulled down into whatever lay beneath the ballroom. "Lyra, stop!" I shouted. "You're not just destroying the house, you're destroying yourself. The anomaly is breaking down, becoming chaotic, without structure, without pattern. You won't transcend reality. You'll be torn apart by it." Her multiple faces turned toward me, expressions ranging from fury to fear. "You're lying. Look around you." I gestured at the increasingly fragmented room. "This isn't controlled folding anymore. It's shattering. Silas made a mistake in his equations, and it's been compounding for centuries. The folds are collapsing." For a moment, Lyra seemed to solidify into a single form, an elderly woman with clear, calculating eyes. "Show me," she demanded. I held up Silas's journal, open to the critical page where I'd identified the error. "Here." He assumed the spatial folds would remain static, but they're dynamic, constantly shifting in response to observation and interaction. The more people who experienced the anomalies, the more unstable they became. Elias had managed to pull himself partially out of the liquefied floor, which was beginning to solidify again as Lyra's attention focused on the equations. "So it's been my fault all along," she murmured. "Every time I navigated the folds, I weakened them further." "Not just you," I said gently. "Every guest who ever came here, every Vance who lived within these walls. The house was designed to be experienced by people, but each experience stretched the folds a little more." Lyra closed her eyes, and for a moment, the chaos in the ballroom subsided slightly. "I can feel it now. The thinning, the tearing." "You're right." She looked at her brother with sudden clarity. "Elias, I'm sorry. I thought I was becoming something greater, but I was just coming undone." "Help us fix it," he said, finally freeing himself from the floor. "You understand the house better than anyone. If we combine our knowledge, yours, mine, Eris's, and Silas's, we might be able to stabilize the folds without collapsing them entirely." The next few hours were a blur of frantic work. Using Silas's journal, Elias's data, and Lyra's intuitive understanding of the house's patterns, we developed a theory. The anomalies could be contained if we created a deliberate, controlled fold, a safety valve of sorts that would allow the excess dimensional energy to dissipate harmlessly. "The third floor," Lyra suggested. "We seal it off completely. Let it exist in its own pocket of reality, separate from the rest of the house and the normal world." "A permanent fold," I mused. "It could work, but how do we create it?" "With an anchor," she said, looking down at her hands. "Something or someone that exists in multiple states simultaneously to hold the pattern in place." Elias paled. "Lyra, no." She smiled sadly. "Brother, I've been neither fully here nor fully gone for decades. This is my purpose, the reason I've been able to navigate the folds when others became lost. I'm meant to be the anchor." "There must be another way," he protested. "There isn't," she said with quiet certainty, "and you know it." As the house continued to deteriorate around us, we worked to prepare the ritual Lyra insisted would create the permanent fold. It required elements from Silas's original work, specific geometric arrangements, materials from the house's foundation, and finally, Lyra herself at the center of it all. We set up in the third-floor corridor, at the junction where the most severe anomalies were occurring. Lyra drew complex patterns on the walls and floor, incorporating Silas's corrected equations. Elias reluctantly gathered objects from throughout the timeline of the house. A brick from the original foundation, a sliver of wood from a tree that hadn't yet been planted, dust from a future when the house would stand abandoned. As dawn approached, felt rather than seen in the windowless corridor, Lyra positioned herself at the center of the pattern. "Once I begin, you must both leave immediately. Return to the second floor or below. Do not look back, no matter what you hear." Elias embraced his sister one last time. Will I ever see you again? Perhaps, she said softly. The folds will still exist, just contained. Sometimes you might catch a glimpse of me in a mirror or hear my voice on the wind, but I will be elsewhere. He nodded, tears in his eyes, and stepped back to join me at the top of the stairs. Lyra began to recite Silas's equations, her voice taking on a strange resonance that seemed to vibrate through the very structure of the house. The patterns around her began to glow with an unearthly light, and the air thickened with potential. Now, she called, go! We turned and hurried down the stairs, the sound of Lyra's recitation growing distorted behind us. As we reached the second-floor landing, a tremendous force shook the entire house. I stumbled, nearly falling, as Elias caught my arm. Above us, a brilliant light flashed from the third-floor stairwell, followed by absolute silence. The tremors subsided. The house settled. After a moment of hesitation, Elias started back up the stairs. Wait, I said, grabbing his sleeve. She said not to look back. I have to know if it worked, he insisted, gently removing my hand. I followed him up to the landing where we both stopped short. Where the third-floor corridor had been, there was now only a solid wall, with no indication a staircase had ever continued upward. Elias pressed his palm flat against the wall, closing his eyes. She's there, he whispered. I can feel her. Not gone, just folded away. We made our way back downstairs in silence, both processing what had happened. The house felt different now. Still unusual, still containing its ballroom that defied conventional geometry, but stable. The rippling walls, the temporal shifts, the sense of impending collapse, all gone. As we descended the grand staircase, I noticed something peculiar. The portraits that had seemed to watch us before now appeared as ordinary paintings, their eyes fixed and unmoving. The corridors no longer stretched impossibly far, but maintained reasonable proportions. Yet the air still held a subtle charge, like the lingering electricity after a thunderstorm. The house is healing itself, Elias said, noticing my observations, returning to a state of equilibrium. Though it will never be entirely normal, too much has happened within these walls. We reached the foyer, where golden morning light streamed through stained glass windows, casting jewel-toned patterns across the marble floor. Outside, birds sang, and the world seemed refreshingly ordinary, a stark contrast to the chaos we'd just experienced. I ran my fingers along a wooden panel, feeling the solid reality of it. Will it stay this way? Stable? Elias nodded cautiously. I believe so. As long as no one attempts to recreate Silas's experiments or disturb what we've sealed away. He gestured to a small portrait I hadn't noticed before, a painting of Lyra as a young woman, her gray eyes sharp and knowing. She'll ensure it, from her side of the fold. What happens now? I asked as we stood in the suddenly peaceful house. Elias looked around as if seeing his ancestral home with new eyes. Now, Dr. Thorne, we document everything. Silas's work, Lyra's sacrifice, your crucial insights. All of it. Future generations of Vances will need to understand what happened here and why the third floor must never be disturbed. And the ballroom? He smiled faintly. The ballroom remains our beautiful impossibility, a reminder of what lies just beyond our conventional understanding of reality. I stayed at Briarcliff Hall for another week, helping Elias catalog Silas's papers and creating a comprehensive record of the events that had transpired. We carefully documented the mathematical principles behind the spatial anomalies, the corrected equations, and explicit warnings about the dangers of attempting to manipulate the folds further. On my last day, Elias walked me to my car, the morning fog lifting to reveal the grand facade of Briarcliff Hall gleaming in the sunlight. Will you tell anyone what really happened here? He asked. I considered the question carefully. I'll publish a paper on the unusual architectural properties of the ballroom, the measurable, verifiable aspects. As for the rest, I smiled, some truths are better preserved within these walls. He nodded, satisfied. You're welcome to return, you know. There's still much to study, even with the third floor sealed away. I might take you up on that, I said, though part of me wondered if I could ever fully readjust to the mundane world after experiencing the fluid reality of Briarcliff Hall. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small ornate key. This was Lyra's. It opens a cabinet in the library containing some of Silas's lesser-known journals. If you do return, perhaps you'd like to examine them. She would have wanted you to. I accepted the key, feeling its weight, both physical and metaphorical, in my palm. Thank you. I'll consider it carefully. As we walked to my car through the morning mist, I found myself looking at the surrounding landscape with new eyes. The ancient oaks that lined the driveway seemed to exist in multiple states at once, their present form overlaid with ghostly images of their past and future selves. Had the house changed my perception permanently, or was my mind simply struggling to readjust to normal reality? You'll see things differently now, Elias said quietly, as if reading my thoughts. The experience never fully leaves you. The Vances have lived with it for generations. Is that why your family rarely leaves the estate? I asked. Partly. The outside world can be disorienting once you've glimpsed what lies beneath its surface. And there's always the fear that we might unintentionally carry the anomalies with us. I thought of the farmer's field that had aged 50 years overnight, the forest that had reverted to saplings. Has that happened before? Once, he admitted. My grandfather traveled to Paris in 1922. The hotel where he stayed experienced a series of inexplicable events. Clocks running backward, rooms that couldn't be found twice in the same day. He returned immediately and never left Briarcliff Hall again. We reached my car, parked where the gravel drive met the main road. The morning sun had burned away most of the fog, revealing the full grandeur of Briarcliff Hall against the backdrop of rolling hills. From the outside, it looked perfectly normal, a beautiful, if imposing example of 18th century architecture. Will you be all right here, alone? I asked. Elias's smile was tinged with melancholy. I'm never truly alone here, and now, perhaps less so. He glanced toward the upper floors of the house. Besides, I have decades of research to organize and a legacy to preserve. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror for one last look at the house. For just a moment, I thought I saw a figure in an upper window where no window should exist. A woman with piercing gray eyes raising her hand in farewell. Then I blinked, and there was only the solid stone wall of the manor's exterior, with no hint of the impossibilities it contained. My name is Dr. Aris Thorne, and I am a historian specializing in architectural anomalies. If you ever receive an invitation to Briarcliff Hall, know this. Every guest will see the magnificent ballroom with its impossible dimensions and painted stars. But no one ever returns from the third floor, because the third floor no longer exists in our reality. It's there, just folded away, with Lyra Vance keeping watch for all eternity over the thin places where our world brushes against others. Sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm half asleep, I still hear that melancholy cello music drifting through my dreams. And I wonder if somewhere, in a fold of reality just beyond our perception, Lyra is still dancing through the endless variations of her family home, no longer lost, but finally free. And if you ever find yourself in a house where the proportions don't quite add up, where corridors seem longer from the inside than they should be, where rooms appear to shift when you're not looking, remember the Vances. Remember that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, some doors meant to stay closed. After all, not everyone who ventures into the folds is fortunate enough to find their way back. In the years following my experience at Briarcliff Hall, I've encountered other buildings with subtle anomalies. Never as pronounced as the manor, but noticeable to those who know what to look for. A hotel in Prague where the East Wing occasionally manifests an extra room. A cathedral in northern Italy where the acoustics change depending on the phase of the moon. A skyscraper in Tokyo with an elevator that sometimes opens onto floors that exist only temporarily. I document these places discreetly, adding to a private archive that will never be published. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share widely, too easily misunderstood or misused. Each discovery reinforces what I learned at Briarcliff Hall, that reality is far more malleable than most people realize, with certain locations serving as pressure points where the fabric thins. I've developed a theory that these thin places occur at the intersection of specific geological, historical, and mathematical conditions. When human architecture interacts with these points in particular ways, the barriers between possibilities weaken. My colleagues in architectural history find my published work on spatial anomalies fascinating, but ultimately academic. They debate the optical illusions and acoustic tricks that might explain the documented phenomena, never suspecting that I've omitted the most compelling evidence from my papers. How could I explain that I've stood in rooms that exist in multiple times simultaneously, that I've witnessed space folding in on itself like origami in the hands of an expert? The dreams began about 6 months after leaving Briarcliff Hall, always the same. I'm walking down an unfamiliar corridor that gradually transforms into the third-floor hallway of the manor. At the end stands Lyra, sometimes young, sometimes old, sometimes something else entirely. She beckons to me, her mouth forming words I can never quite hear. I always wake before reaching her, heart pounding, sheets damp with sweat. Elias keeps in touch, sending cryptic postcards from Briarcliff Hall every few months. The ballroom hosted a charity gala, one might read, or simply, the wall remains solid. I understand his real message. The fold is holding. Lyra's sacrifice continues to protect our reality from whatever lies beyond. Sometimes I wonder if Silas Vance was a madman who stumbled upon a fundamental truth about our universe, or a visionary who saw beyond the limitations of conventional physics. Perhaps he was both. His equations, corrected and stabilized, suggest possibilities that modern science is only beginning to theorize: multiverses, dimensional bubbles, malleability of space-time. I've had his equations reviewed anonymously by several theoretical physicists. Most dismiss them as elegant but fantastical mathematical constructs. One, however, a quantum physicist from Caltech, responded with disturbing enthusiasm. His letter practically vibrated with excitement as he explained how Silas's formulas aligned with certain bleeding-edge theories about quantum foam and dimensional permeability. He requested the source of the equations and any experimental data. I never replied. 3 years after my visit to Briarcliff Hall, I received a disturbing news alert. The Caltech physicist had vanished from his apartment, leaving behind walls covered in equipment and equations that bore a striking resemblance to Silas's work. According to the article, neighbors reported hearing strange sounds from his apartment for weeks before his disappearance, sounds they described as like someone rearranging furniture in impossible ways. The authorities found no evidence of foul play, but they did note that the apartment's dimensions seemed unusual compared to the building's floor plan. I called Elias immediately. "Have you been sharing Silas' work?" I demanded when he answered. "Of course not," he replied, sounding genuinely confused. "Why would you ask such a thing?" I told him about the physicist, and a long silence followed. "It's happening again," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Someone else has discovered the principles independently." "That's impossible," I argued. "The mathematics are too complex, too specific." "Nabe. Aris," he said gravely. "What if the knowledge doesn't just spread through conventional means? What if the folds themselves communicate?" The idea sent a chill through me. What if the thin places in reality were somehow connected? What if information could bleed through from one to another, infecting receptive minds with dangerous knowledge. A week later, I received a package from Elias, a small wooden box containing a brass key and a note. For when you're ready to return. Some doors have reopened, though not the one we sealed. I keep the key in my desk drawer, both tempted and terrified by what it might unlock. The rational part of me, the academic, the historian, wants to return to Briarcliff Hall to continue documenting its wonders and anomalies. But another part remembers the feeling of reality shifting beneath my feet, the terror and exhilaration of experiencing something that should not be possible. Last night, the dream changed. Instead of Lyra waiting at the end of the corridor, I found a door. An ordinary wooden door with a brass keyhole that matched the key Elias had sent me. In the dream, I inserted the key, turned it, and felt the mechanism click. As the door began to swing open, I glimpsed what lay beyond. Not a room, but a swirling vortex of possibilities. 1,000 versions of Briarcliff Hall layered atop one another like transparent slides. And standing in the midst of this impossibility was Lyra, her form shifting between all her potential selves, her hand extended in invitation. This time, I didn't wake before reaching the end of the corridor. Instead, I stepped forward, taking her hand. The sensation was electric, like touching a live wire, but without pain. Knowledge flooded through me, understanding of the folds, of the thin places, of the true nature of Briarcliff Hall and dozens of other locations around the world. We need you, Lyra's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. The physicist has torn a new hole. It's growing. I woke with a gasp, the key clutched in my hand, though I had no memory of retrieving it from the drawer. The metal was warm, almost hot to the touch, as though it had absorbed energy from somewhere beyond our reality. My phone was ringing. Elias. How had he known to call at that exact moment? You felt it too, he said, when I answered, not bothering with a greeting. Yes, I admitted. The dream. Not a dream, he corrected. A communication. The folds are thinning again. But not here. Somewhere else. The physicist's apartment, I suspect. What does Lyra want from me? Help, Elias said simply. You're one of the few who understand the mathematics, who has experienced the folds and returned unscathed, and you're not tied to Briarcliff Hall as we are. You're suggesting I go to Los Angeles? To the physicist's apartment? To seal another tear, yes. Before it spreads. I glanced at the key in my palm, still unnaturally warm. And this? What does this open? A door that only exists when needed, he said cryptically. Lyra will guide you. The rational part of me wanted to dismiss it all, to place the key back in the drawer, to tell Elias I wasn't interested in further entanglement with impossible physics and dimensional anomalies. But I knew I wouldn't. The folds had marked me, just as Elias had warned. I was part of this now, perhaps had been, since the moment I crossed the threshold of Briarcliff Hall. I'll leave tomorrow, I told him. Be careful, Eris, he cautioned. The folds are not malevolent, but they are indifferent to our well-being, and there may be others who have glimpsed the truth, who seek to use it for purposes beyond our understanding. Others? Like who? He hesitated. I don't know. But over the generations, my family has occasionally encountered individuals with unusual interest in Briarcliff Hall. People who seem to know too much, who ask questions no outsider should think to ask. A thought occurred to me. The physicist, did he ever contact you or visit the manor? No, Elias said. But 3 months ago, someone broke into the local historical society archives. The only items disturbed were the original town records from when Silas built the manor. The implications were clear. Someone was hunting for information about spatial anomalies, someone who understood enough to know where to look. The physicist might have been their pawn, unwittingly pushed toward dangerous experimentation. After ending the call, I booked a flight to Los Angeles for the following day. Then I sat at my desk, staring at the key that shouldn't be warm, but was. On an impulse, I held it up to my ear, like a child listening to a seashell for the ocean. A faint sound emanated from the metal, the now familiar melancholy cello piece I'd first heard at Briarcliff Hall. The music that had led me to the ballroom, the music that had signaled shifts in reality. "I hear you, Lyra," I whispered. "I'm coming." Perhaps someday I'll use that key to return to Briarcliff Hall itself. Perhaps I'll once again walk through those halls where the past, present, and future blur together. Perhaps I'll even catch another glimpse of Lyra, the woman who became an anchor for a fold in reality. Or perhaps some doors are better left unlocked but unopened, a possibility preserved but not explored. But I know the truth now. I am already on my way to Los Angeles, the key tucked safely in my pocket, growing warmer with every mile that brings me closer to another thin place. This is my calling now, to find the tears in reality, to mend them before they spread, to protect the unsuspecting world from knowledge it isn't ready to comprehend. Elias was right about one thing. No one truly leaves Briarcliff Hall. Even as I sit on this plane, watching clouds pass beneath me, I can feel the house's influence, the subtle pull of its impossibilities, the echo of its folded spaces in my perception of the world. In my briefcase, I carry Silas's corrected equations, my own notes on spatial anomalies, and a small leather-bound journal I've been keeping since my departure from the manor. Its pages detail my growing sensitivity to thin places, how I can sometimes sense them before seeing them, like a migraine aura or the pressure drop before a storm. The flight attendant passes, offering drinks, her movement leaving a brief trail of after images in my perception. Not quite the temporal shifting I experienced at Briarcliff Hall, but a milder version, as though my eyes now naturally capture more moments than they should. Is this what happened to Lyra? Did her perception gradually shift until she existed in multiple states simultaneously? Will the same eventually happen to me? The thought is both terrifying and strangely alluring. The key pulses with warmth against my thigh, almost like a heartbeat, calling me, guiding me. I wonder where it will ultimately lead. To the physicist's apartment? Yes. But beyond that? To other thin places around the world? To secrets even the Vances don't know? After all, every guest sees the ballroom with its impossible dimensions and painted stars that seem to move. But no one returns from the third floor, except that I did return, in a sense. And now, the third floor, or what it represents, has followed me. The folds have marked me, changed me, recruited me into their service. As the plane begins its descent into Los Angeles, I take out the key and study it in the slanting afternoon light. For just a moment, I see something impossible. Through the solid metal, as though it were transparent, I glimpse an eye. Lyra's eye, piercing gray and knowing, watching me from whatever folded reality she now inhabits. "I'm coming," I whisper again, too softly for my seatmate to hear. "I'll help you seal the tear." The eye blinks once in acknowledgement, then vanishes, leaving only an ordinary brass key resting in my palm. And some mysteries should remain exactly that, mysteries. But others must be confronted, understood, and carefully contained, lest they unravel the very fabric of our reality. This is my story. This is my purpose now. This is the legacy of Briarcliff Hall and its impossible third floor. Not just a tale to frighten guests, but a responsibility passed from one keeper of secrets to another, across generations and dimensions. My name is Dr. Aris Thorne, and I stand guardian at the threshold between what is and what might be. Remember this warning, should you ever encounter a building that doesn't quite conform to the laws of physics. Look, appreciate, but do not delve too deeply, for not all who wander the folds are as fortunate as I am, and not all doors once opened can ever truly be closed again.